Before we start today's episode, I want to pause and I want to acknowledge where we have been in the story, what today's going to hold, and then where we're going. I have a lot of empathy for you as a viewer as I acknowledge the toll that this is taking on me to recount this story. I don't expect you to have the same reaction that I'm having reliving this, but I want to recognize that this is particularly heavy, hard stuff. I said that in the beginning that the first season was a lot, and true to my word, season 1 really does continue to pack some pretty heavy punches. And some of the best stories start in some of the darkest places, and I just want to remind all of us collectively that the point of this story isn't the darkness, the point of this story is the light. And yet, in order for the light to shine brightly, we're going to have to trudge through some more darkness. This episode and the next few after it are going to continue to be really dark. They're going to continue to be really difficult. They're going to continue to hold a lot of unbelievable plot points that are not easy for me to talk about. There is nothing of more importance to me than protecting the agency and emotional well-being and mental health and physical safety and all the things in my mother's heart centered around protecting my children. They all know that I'm sharing this story. I have their express permission to share this story. And the point of today's episode is not them. The point of this story is to share with you what it felt like for me to walk through this process of telling my children categorically the worst news of their entire life. And so with that, let's begin. So as I anticipated, what I knew was going to be the worst conversation of their entire life, every time I started to tip towards the feelings involved in that and realizing the weight that this event was going to have on them and the way it was going to change their life for the remainder of their life. There was going to be this before and after kind of watermark, and this conversation was going to be the place where their life changed. Every time I thought about the feelings associated with that, it almost toppled me and I could not handle it. So I did what I had always done for the sake of being able to do what I needed to do and to care for them well while doing it. And I tucked my feelings away. As I donned my crisis manager hat one more time in order to protect myself from being toppled by the emotions that were right underneath the surface, there were two main categories of things that I needed to address. There were the logistics around getting them all in the same room at the same time. And then there was, what in the world can I do to prepare for the fallout once they hear the news? So to the first one, the logistics around getting them all in the same room. So the Friday that I found out, followed by that first weekend, followed by that first week, the following Saturday after the Friday that I found out was the University of Arkansas-Oklahoma football game that was being held at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, which is just 20 minutes from where we lived at the time. So I knew that my son, who was a student at Arkansas, was going to be coming in town for that game for sure, because he was marching with the marching band. My daughter had attended the University of Arkansas, but wasn't at the time, and she was working at a camp in East Texas. So I had my two youngest at home, a son in Fayetteville, and a daughter in East Texas. Getting them all in the same room was rare at best, but this football game kind of provided a little bit of an excuse for all of them to see each other. So I knew that my son was definitely coming in town, but he was scheduled to ride the buses that the university was providing for the marching band, which means he would have come in town for the game, marched at the game, and then they get back on the bus and drive straight back. There's no like hanging out or spending time with family. It's a real direct to and from situation. I used my motherly leverage, let's call it, and compelled him to drive his own car. I knew that if I could get him to drive his own car to Fort Worth for the game, that I could then expect him to be present Saturday afternoon after the game and available to be in our home. I convinced him to drive his car, and then I said, hey, after the game, I would really appreciate it if you would protect that afternoon and plan to come home. So he agreed. He said he would drive his car. He said that he would protect that afternoon at home. So I had him anchored, protected, ready to be home that afternoon. My daughter, who had been a student at Arkansas, had mentioned trying to get a ticket to the game, but in the end that fell through. However, some of her friends who were still at the university were planning to travel in for the game and tailgate. And she was kind of like thinking about trying to come in town just for the tailgate so she could see them. I, of course, thought that was the best idea she'd ever thought of. I was like, you should definitely come in town for the tailgate. That sounds so fun. You'll get to see them. Who cares about the game? And with a little cajoling, I convinced her to also come in town for the game. And I said, hey, by the way, I would really appreciate it if you would protect the time after the game and plan to be at home. And she obliged. So I had my son, I had my older daughter, and now I obviously had my two at home. They had some stuff on Saturday, but I was like, hey, we're all gonna be back at the house Saturday after the game, and everybody was gonna be home. So the logistics problem I took care of. And I'm so grateful for that game and the way that it gave everybody a reason to be in town, because otherwise I don't think it would have been possible to tell everyone at the same time, to tell all four of them at the same time. They are all really close to each other, and so having them in the same room not only would allow me to be in person with them after they heard the news, but also for them to be together. That felt like a really high value to me. And again, if I hadn't been able to make it possible, we would have figured something out. But it was possible because of this football game, and that's one of the things I'm really grateful for. So once the logistics were in place for all four of them to be in our home Saturday afternoon in person together, I communicated to him, this is what's gonna happen. I said, they're all four gonna be there. I will let you know when my son is on the way so that the timing works out, because I did not want him coming to the house and just hanging out. Keep in mind, we have not been in the same room since the phone call on that Friday. And I said, the thing that's really important to me is that you deliver this news. I knew that we were separating, and what we were telling them was why we were separating. At this point, I had not filed for divorce. I knew that I did not want him living at home, and I didn't know how long I wanted him not living at home, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. Kind of the only thing that I knew without a shadow of a doubt was I did not want him living at that house with me while I figured out what to do next. So that's separation. And because of that separation, we needed to tell our kids we are separating. And in order to tell them why we're separating, there needs to be a reason why. He did not want to tell them. And I insisted, we are going to tell them. There's not a way for you to not live at home and not tell them what's going on. Then he wanted to couch it in very vague terms, that we were having some differences, that there were some challenges we were facing. There was some work we needed to do. And I absolutely was not going to have any of that. I did not have the ability to placate or excuse or hide or put on another facade that things were palatable when they absolutely were not. In my mind, it was, we're going to tell them we're separating, and you're going to tell them why. I suggested some very clear verbiage. I did not think that they needed to know every nitty-gritty detail, but I did think that they were old enough to hear the truth, and we didn't need to paint it as anything other than what it was. The infidelity and the dishonesty were kind of the two pillars that I wanted him to share with them, not in detail, but just as this is why we're separating. We went back and forth a lot over this, received a lot of pushback on this. He did not want to do it. He categorically told me that the reason that I wanted him to do this was to sabotage his relationship with our kids, and that by me insisting that he be honest with them, that all I was interested in was sabotaging that relationship. There was never a realization from him that being honest and open was absolutely the right thing to do for everyone involved. There was always this default of, how can I negotiate the truth and hide part of it to protect myself? That was a pattern, and I was not going to stand for it in this situation. So I was very clear with him that I expected him to steer the conversation, and I expected him to be explicit and direct and honest, that I was not going to cover up or hide or make excuses for, that we were not separating because we were having some problems. We were separating because he had created a mess, and the mess was centered around infidelity and dishonesty. So I communicated the plan to him. I communicated my expectations. I had the logistics worked out for all four of my children to be in the same room on a Saturday afternoon. The only next thing that I knew how to do was try to anticipate their needs. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what they were going to need, but I knew that I needed to be ready to care for them on a very granular kind of way, in the same way that I had learned to care for myself on this physical level. That is literally all I could think of to anticipate. So I did two things. I made one of their favorite meals. I made tomato soup and grilled cheese. I made it ahead, and I had it waiting, knowing whenever it's time, I'm going to pull this meal out. It's going to be the right meal for the situation. The other thing I did is I loaded up on junk food. Now, I'm not a junk food person. I mean, a little bit of junk food is fun. I don't center my life around junk food. My kids have never centered their lives around junk food. They're kids, so they like junk food. Sometimes when we have encountered this kind of like traumatic thing in our life and our body needs calories, but sometimes we don't have an appetite for things that we would normally enjoy, that sometimes you just need to eat something and junk food is the right thing for the job. Sometimes you need to eat a cookie. Sometimes you just need to have a pouch of applesauce. Sometimes you need some peanut butter crackers, like just something to keep your body metabolizing calories to fuel that adrenaline. And so in anticipation of them needing to eat but not wanting to eat, I went to the grocery store, filled my cart with every manner of chip and cookie and individually packaged snack you can imagine. It's all I could think to do. I stocked up on things that I knew that they liked. I stocked up on things that I wasn't sure they liked, but I thought might sound fun. I think I even bought sugar cereal, which is something we never stocked in our house. So I was just doing anything I could to not only anticipate their need, but also kind of anticipate my desire to care well for them and what would I want to have on hand in order to do that. And filling the pantry and the fridge with easy to grab, delicious food, and then cooking a meal ready to serve them. That's what I did. That's the only thing I knew to do. So when that Saturday arrived, you can imagine I was a wreck. There is nothing worse than the kind of waiting and anticipation when you know that something awful is about to happen. It's the worst kind of waiting. I felt nauseous. I felt emotionally uneasy. My whole being was wrapped up in the negative anticipation of what was about to unfold. When everybody started to gather, when I sent the text that it was time to come over, I did my best to stay steady. So I put on that calm demeanor. I was freaking out inside. My palms were sweaty. The minute that he walked into our house, again, the first time that we had been together in the same room since the terrible phone call Friday, I started to have this involuntary physical response. My adrenaline rushed, my breathing got shallow, my heart started to pound. I felt myself having that same kind of physical response to him that I had had that same day. So I sat down in a chair in the corner of our living room and just sort of like sat down. Didn't say anything, didn't do anything. My children are, filing in or whatever. He sits down in a chair kind of like across from me. 3 of our children sit on the couch that is kind of like adjacent to the chair where I was sitting, and 1 child sat across the room exactly diagonally from me in another chair. They all sit down, they're kind of giggling and blah, blah, blah. And I am just kind of stoically looking at the ground, and one of them mentions, "What's going on?" And the lack of response, I think, kind of like heightened their awareness that this was not a good conversation. He started in. He did not beat around the bush. He was very direct. He did own the actions and the reasoning why behind we were separating. First few sentences were very spot on as to not beating around the bush, just saying the hard thing, ripping off the Band-Aid, owning the reason why. And in my estimation, it should have stopped there. Instead, he continued to talk and centered the conversation around how he was feeling, which I think was a mistake. Not that his feelings weren't valid, not that he wasn't feeling them, not that there wasn't a time and place for him to feel the way that he felt about the whole situation. I just felt like it wasn't the right time to do that. Nobody in the room had the capability to care for the way that he felt about this horrible mess that he made. The news was out there. He made the statement, "We're getting separated. Here's why." At the very outset, I turned my attention from him to them because I knew what was about to land in their minds, in their hearts, in their emotions, in their bodies. And I turned my attention to them. I have never in all my life experienced something as horrible as watching my children receive life-changing, terrible news. It was like watching my kids be in an emotional car wreck in slow motion and not being able to do anything to stop the crash. Their responses were appropriate and they were pretty profound. One of my kids had a full-blown panic attack and couldn't breathe. One of my children went completely kind of comatose, stood still as a statue, really had this kind of concerning lack of reaction, almost like they were stuck in that freeze sort of trauma response. One of my kids buckled over the back of the couch, heaving, sobbing, unable to stand up. I knew it was necessary to tell them. There was not a path forward where I couldn't tell them. And there was not a path forward where I could paint this as anything other than what it was. As a mother, though, it was the single worst day of my life. I watched them emotionally shatter, splinter. I watched their bodies do everything in their power to protect them and help them survive. There was this real slow motion quality about the whole thing where everyone is being gutted at the same time, responding to that in 4 different ways and needing immediate emotional and physical care. I got up, I started tending to their needs. I took care of whoever needed the most attention at the time. It was like a triage in the ER. Like, this one's not breathing. I probably need to give them my full attention. Okay, this one is breathing. That one hasn't moved in 10 minutes. I'm gonna enter in and see what I can do there. It was the worst. And I was able to keep my own personal feelings at bay to care for theirs. And what I really wish would have happened is I wish he would have left. I wish he would have delivered the news, maybe checked in with each of them and then left, but that's not what happened. I can understand the reasoning why. I think he wanted to linger. I think he wanted to be part of the caretaking process. I think he wanted to not be seen as walking out in the middle of this big moment. Unfortunately, there was just not a way in that moment for them to see him as anything other than the perpetrator of the harm. And by staying and lingering and trying to enter in with them to care for them on wounds that he had caused, I could tell that they were not honestly interacting and having the most authentic of their reactions because of his presence. I was also aware he had every right to be there. I had put up very strong boundaries and he was within those and he had a right to be there as their dad. And then it reached a point where I could tell the agitation was growing and it was actually doing more damage than good for him to be there. After a while, couldn't tell you how long, but after a while, I said to him, you need to go. He didn't want to go, and I said, you need to go. And sure enough, after he left, there was this ability for the 4 of them and me to have a deeper level of honest conversation about what was going on and how they were feeling and what it meant, and for them to ask some questions and for me to say some things and care for them in ways that I wouldn't have done if he were in the room. Between my children and myself at that time, there was a real shared sense of knowing. There was a strong sense of bondedness between me and them, both collectively and individually. I felt very secure in my relationship with each of them, in my relationship with them as a group, because of the ground that we had trekked together over the past years. They had looped me in on their lived experience with him in a way that I was unaware of, and I had protected that privacy and honored that trust of them to tell me this in a way that really forged some strength of relationship between me and each of them. That proved to be so beneficial in this moment. I was not starting from a place of needing to establish trust with them. I had trust with them. Our relationships were solidified. They knew that I was with them. One of my children, about an hour or 2 after the news dropped, looked at me and thanked me. And I said, for what? And they said, just thank you. One of my children was expressing their anger and frustration, their sadness, and they verbalized, I cannot believe that this whole time I knew something was wrong, and he kept making me feel like it wasn't. I was not the only one that felt like the light got flipped on when the news came out. It connected dots for them. It explained a lot of things for them. It was the horrifying realization that their gut and their internal sense of intuition had been right, despite them wanting it not to be right. They each had their own unique set of experiences with him, positive and negative, and all of them knew that what he told them that day explained their worst fears on a very gut level. As they each sort of came out of the first phase of that traumatic response, they all chose to go somewhere else. We were together for a little while, kind of talking through some stuff, coming out of the first initial wave of everything, and one by one, as they all kind of looked inside and tried to figure out what they needed, they all needed to go be with someone else. Community is a beautiful thing. I am so grateful that my children each had people in their lives, families in their lives, who provided a safe place where they were welcomed in this horrible time. I wasn't upset that they wanted to go somewhere else. I considered it a gift to have other people walk through this with us. And so they each kind of went to their respective corners of community and what they were taken care of in a variety of ways. The junk food and the tomato soup and grilled cheese did come in handy. There were two really amazing moments of levity that came in the middle of this awfulness. The first was when I was cooking the dinner. They were all mystified. I can't believe you had this meal ready. One of them quoted the Taylor Swift song Mastermind and said, "What if I told you none of it was accidental?" And it kind of broke the ice a little bit. Like they were cluing into the fact that I had known this was going to be awful and I had made this tomato soup and grilled cheese meal. And it was kind of funny. The other moment that happened in relation to the junk food, which got eaten, it came in so handy to have those. But one of my children said, "You know, I knew something was off." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "I knew when I looked at the pantry, something wasn't right. You have never purchased circus animal cookies before. That told me that something was going on." And everyone agreed, like, yeah, it was the sugar cereal, or yeah, like our pantry has never been this stocked with chips and crackers. And it was this really funny, light moment in a sea of darkness that reminded me it might not be now, and it might not be next week, and it might not be next year, but we are going to get through this. We are going to be okay. We are going to come out on the other side. Somehow we made it through. We had each other, and it was time to keep going.